welcome to Depth Insights, where we take a depth psychological look at news, topics, and events that are going on in your world today. I'm your host, Bonnie Bright, and among other things, I'm the founder of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is an online academic community for those who are interested and active in the field of depth and Jungian psychology. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Lori Pye, who is the director and the founder of the Institute for Cultural Change. Lori did her Ph.D. in Mythological Studies with an emphasis in depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Carpinteria, California. And as well as being the director and the founder of the Institute for Cultural Change, she has also worked as an environmentalist with NGOs around the world. She's founded several nonprofit organizations, and she has led multiple international conferences with some of the greats, particularly in the world of depth psychology, names you'll know, like James Hillman and Thomas Moore, among many, many others. She also finds the time to teach ecopsychology topics at the University of California, Santa Barbara, at Naropa University and Antioch University, and also she teaches mythology and depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. If you're interested in the online depth psychology community, you can visit Depth Psychology Alliance at www.depthpsychologyalliance.com. You're a busy woman, Lori. Welcome. It's good to have you here with me.
Thanks, Bonnie. Joy being here.
Great. Well, before we dive in, I would like to announce that Lori and I have some exciting news, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So just a little teaser there. You know, neuroscience tells us that as an emotion, if you can call it that, I guess, anticipation is actually the greatest form of pleasure. So we're going to save that for a bit later. Lori, maybe we can start off and you can just talk a little bit about the Institute for Cultural Change and maybe just give us an idea of your own motivation and your passion for starting it and talk about some of the goals that you have with the Institute.
Okay. Well, we started in 2008, and the idea was to create an organization that we could build community around that promoted mainly individual change. And what I mean by that is really consciousness. If we want to effect change in the world, then we need to understand how to effect change in ourselves first. And following the notion sort of Jung's collective unconscious, we felt like if we created an organization where we could give people the tools and training and educational resources to understand how to make change or to co-participate in their own individual evolution, then we would take the best of ourselves forward into the culture and effect change in the culture. So that was sort of the idea behind that, and it's really much more of an ecological perspective, because if we change ourselves for the better for our ecosystem, then we put that into the culture, and somehow, some way, we think that will effect a more ecological, positive change in the culture. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And what you're talking about right now is so absolutely critical when we see what's going on in the environment and the world around us. And, of course, that's a very core depth psychological tenet that the outer world reflects the inner world and vice versa. So clearly what you are doing is a very powerful form of depth psychology. I wonder if you couldn't just, maybe for the benefit of all of us, share your description of what you would say depth psychology is and also include ecopsychology in that. That's a topic that's close to my own heart, for sure.
Okay. Well, we probably should do one at a time because they're pretty interesting definitions. I mean, depth psychology has a long history coming out of, Freud and even before Freud, but it was really with Freud's understanding of mythology, images, and symbols in the unconscious that we moved into sort of a deeper understanding of what depth psychology was. So the way I work it with my students is basically it's any psychology that seeks to understand the symbols and imagery of the unconscious. And quite simply, the unconscious is that which we don't know about in ourselves. That's why it's unconscious. It's unknown. It's unseen. So depth psychology seeks to uncover that and to try to work through imagery and symbol to understand how our inner life, our psychological life, is communicating with us so that we can understand what we don't see, what's unconscious, to make it conscious. So that's sort of a very general introduction or to the definition of one of the definitions of depth psychology. Where ecopsychology plays into that, and there's so many definitions of ecopsychology, it's not standardized, whereas depth psychology, there's a pretty much, there's an academic understanding of what that means. But with ecopsychology, there's not really that there yet. So everyone sort of teaches it from a different perspective. Some people teach it with outdoor education. Some people teach permaculture. And I approach it from a depth and archetypal perspective.
That's very interesting because the outside world, actually what you were saying about symbols and images and even archetypes, which of course are patterns, the natural world is probably the richest source of those that we could point to.
We could, and you just plucked out very astutely the most critical term, and that's patterns. Ecopsychology looks at patterns within the natural world that will help us find metaphors or analogies for patterns in our psychological life. And that's the value of it. It's sometimes difficult to unravel our own mythologies or our own stories to understand who we are. Who we are is in the sense of who are we in a particular behavior at a particular time in a particular situation. That's hard to come at directly.
It is hard to come at directly, and that's where the image and the symbol comes in. I can relate to that primarily because I did my master's thesis on colony collapse disorder, which is the mass vanishing of the honeybees. And by digging into the symbolism of that, I really understood so much more about myself and my own relationship to the world, and not just in the realm of nature, but also of my psyche and my behavior and my patterns and really the core part of my being.
Well, I always remember something that Jung has said several times, C.G. Jung, in his writings, that the unconscious seeks to become conscious. And one of the ideas around depth psychology is that it explores that relationship between what we know and we don't know about ourselves. It explores the relationship between what's conscious and unconscious. And, looking at these patterns in the natural world, we can't anthropomorphize and say what's conscious or not conscious in nature, but to be able to understand how the patterns work gives us an idea of what the mechanisms are behind our own behaviors.
Exactly. Yeah, I really like what you said about the words that you used earlier were to co-participate in change. And so maybe I know that a lot of the events that you offer through the Institute of Cultural Change are focused on ecopsychology, but you've also expanded that into a much greater realm. Could you just talk a little bit about one of the exciting events that I know is coming up in March?
Right. In March, we have a workshop, a weekend devoted to facilitating creative consciousness, and that will be led by two of the pioneers in mind-body healing and research and in neuroscience, and that's Ernest Rossi and his wife, Catherine Rossi. The weekend is March 18th through the 20th, and we decided to devote a whole weekend to this because it really is a key to understanding how to change behavior. And I know you know a bit about neuroscience, Bonnie, because I know it's one of your interests and passions, and you might agree that now we're seeing a very interesting relationship develop between depth psychology and the neurosciences, because the neurosciences is actually proving now what depth psychology has been working on in psyche for several centuries. So it's interesting to follow this along, but now seeing that science can actually prove what in depth psychology we've been studying.
Absolutely. I think I often think that C.G. Jung, if he were here to see this, would be thrilled about this, because it was so much of his aim to establish depth psychology very strongly as a science, but he just didn't have the same tools that we have now with fMRI and brain scans and so many of the new technologies that are allowing us to actually see what is going on. And while it's not quite the capacity to see the unconscious, at least we can see some of the processes that support what we know is emerging from the unconscious.
Right. Well, we can't see the unconscious. That's exactly it. But we can spot patterns.
Exactly.
And in spotting patterns, then we're actually starting to communicate a little bit with the unconscious. Or the way I look at it is we're allowing the unconscious to communicate with us.
Absolutely. Well, that's a very exciting event. I look forward to that, and I know that Ernest Rossi is definitely one of the pioneers on the forefront of that field, and he's an amazing speaker. I've heard him speak before. So that event is taking place in Southern California, is that correct?
Right. We'll be at the Zimmer Conference Center in Ojai, California, and you can go to our website, instituteforculturalchange.org, and all the information is right there.
Great. And why don't you, while we're on that subject, talk to us also about the event that's coming up in June, because that's an exciting one as well.
That is. The June 24th through 26th event will be in Santa Barbara, California, and that's called, it's a special event that ICC is hosting called These Women. And the name is kind of interesting. It's a play on a book written by Nora Hall that was called Those Women. And the book was on Dionysus and how that particular Greek god facilitated woman's midlife crisis as sort of a psychopomp. And I know that language is not going to be familiar to your readers, but basically the god Dionysus is very much involved in a woman's not just midlife crisis, but what we go through in midlife and how we reorient ourselves to our lives after, maybe kids have grown and moved on. We've changed maybe our vocation, or things in our own psychology have changed to start to dig a little deeper as to who we are. It's one of the things that Jung talked about. We don't really start that process until, our midlife time. And Dionysus is one god that facilitates that. So Nora wrote an incredible book on that. But the idea behind the weekend is that we're bringing together some of the women pioneers in depth psychology, Jungian psychology, and archetypal psychology to honor them and to give the participants an opportunity to dialogue with these women around a lot of different topics, because for the most part, we don't have an opportunity to be in front of these formidable voices, and so we're trying to bring them all together and provide that opportunity for people. And this first year, we're committed to a 3-year process, so hopefully we can get all the women honored. But this first year, we're focusing on honoring Pat Berry, Lynn Cowan, Christine Downing, Nora Hall, Ginette Paris, Hendrika DeVries, Mary Watkins, and Marion Woodwin.
Well, that's a really powerful place to be, to dialogue with women of that caliber, and I'm sure that many people who are listening to this will be familiar with all of those names, particularly in the world of Jungian and depth psychology. Mm-hmm. And I really, you used the word psychopomp earlier, and most people who have studied depth psychology or even shamanic studies will be familiar with that word. That word really alludes to somebody who accompanies a person on their journey either to or from the underworld. And I just feel like right now in our culture and with so much that's going on in the world around us, that we really have need of that guidance. We need an escort. We need somebody to be with us in this process. And so it's very powerful to have these kinds of events that are available to us to go and get into touch with that.
Yeah, well said, beautifully articulated, yeah.
And I would say the other piece of that, too, that I'm thinking about is just understanding the mythology of it and the power of understanding Dionysus and who he is and what his role is. Because when we can understand mythology, we can locate ourselves within that story or within that space, or identify with a character or identify with a situation, as archetypal as it might be, and that also helps us to be able to then understand ourselves better and to make decisions that will be based strongly on that. And I know you have a background in mythology. Do you foresee events that are based on mythology coming up at some point in the future of the Institute for Cultural Change?
Well, we're going to be doing in September an event with Thomas Singer on cultural complexes. And, of course, anytime you start to deal in the world of psychology around complexes, you bring in the mythology, whether it's the mythology of the individual or the mythology of the culture. And I'm excited about this, not because it's content that I've always been interested in, but also what's going on in the global arena right now. We're seeing amazing history being made in front of our eyes. The Arab world is changing, and it's changing radically and very quickly, and we don't know what's going to be on the other side of that change, but they're dealing with cultural complexes. They're coming up against them, and so to witness this is just amazing, and I'm very excited to see what Thomas Singer has to say about that.
Yes, and me as well. Yeah, great. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about something that I alluded to earlier, and that is that we have some exciting news to share. We have agreed, Lori and I, to combine into a partnership, a very exciting alliance, actually, for both of our organizations. Lori is the founder for the Institute for Cultural Change, and me as the founder for Depth Psychology Alliance. And we're going to be moving forward in a partnership to help each other to really get the word out into the world and support people who are looking to do both personal and cultural change. So, Lori, I'm really excited about that. I know that you are too. I'd like to give you just a minute to respond to that in whatever way that you feel. And then maybe what we can do is just spend the last few minutes talking about the archetype of community and alliance and what that means both to our organizations but as well as to the whole community that we are serving and to the greater cultural at large.
Great. Okay.
So what would you like to say about that?
Oh, well, I'm agreeing with you. I'm sitting here shaking my head, and of course, this is audio. So I think the alliance between the Center for Ecopsychology, Institute for Cultural Change, and sort of Depth Psychology Alliance is exciting because I have found your organization very alive, and you're a powerhouse in social networking. The intellect and the sense of community is there. The conversations are interesting, and we wanted to be a part of that and also ways to contribute as well to continuing to build community. We haven't had a chance to talk a lot about it, but one of the things I feel is going to be the most important as we move forward, and what I'm agreeing with some of the experts is that we're going to face some very severe environmental changes, ecological changes, and I think community is going to be very important in how we are able to deal with these changes and get through them. So to build community now where we have support systems, where we have people that we can, rely on or go to or share things with, I think is going to be extremely important in the next 20, 30 years, Bonnie.
Absolutely. I agree with that, too. And one thing, again, that has been very significant to me is just the power of being able to come together now with technology, what it is. I know that a lot of people are still shying away a bit from what we have termed social media, but the fact that so many people with such very common interests, but as well quite focused interests, can come together in one place and be able to discuss and share their ideas and their work and their thoughts and truly meet online, in a location where they may never have had the opportunity to do so in the physical world is very powerful, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to combine with your organization in the sense that you have so much expertise in the realm of ecopsychology, of mythology. You understand the value of tradition. You understand the power of depth psychology. And you're doing the same thing in the physical world. You're bringing people together into community where they can meet and talk and discuss these issues that are so important. And in a way, providing, I guess, both of our organizations with the guidance and the help and the support that you allude to. I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of changes coming, and we've seen that. And frankly, there's going to be more to come. I'm quite certain on all fronts: cultural, ecopsychological, environmental, and there's a need for us to band together and really put all of our energy together into a place where we can do something about it. Again, both individually and on a cultural level.
Yeah, there's power in numbers, and the wonderful saying that Margaret Mead left us with is that change usually happens by only a few individuals. So a few organizations coming together, with a few individuals that are part of those organizations, I do think we can effect change in our culture. And one culture affects another culture, as of course we're seeing. So I don't know how it's all going to look in the end, Bonnie. When I actually die and leave this planet, I don't really know the footprint that's going to be left. But to me, I can't imagine not doing anything else in my life but trying to facilitate change to make, the world a more ecological, just place for everyone to live. And whatever little part that we're able to do together, to me, is the most exciting thing, because this planet and the species that live on it, to me, are worth every effort that we can make to try to not just protect and preserve everything, because every organism has its lifespan, and some organisms are not going to be around, but certainly want to facilitate some sort of educational and psychological understanding that we don't have to participate in our own demise or the demise of other species as well.
Absolutely. So well said, and I second all of that, 2,000%. So, Lori, we're going to bring that to a close, and I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy, and I'm just so in awe, really, of all the efforts that you're making, and it's very powerful for Depth Psychology Alliance to have this kind of partnership with the Institute for Cultural Change, and also with you personally. So thank you very much.
Well, it's mutual. The awe is mutual, believe me, and what you have going with Depth Psychology Alliance is just phenomenal, and we're really proud to be working with you.
Thank you. And you can find both organizations online. The Institute for Cultural Change can be found at instituteforculturalchange.org, and Depth Psych Alliance can be found at depthpsychologyalliance.com. Thank you, Lori.